Hi, this is Ira Gorlick, and this is the seventh part of my spontaneous order lectures. And this is the final problem I have with spontaneous order, and maybe the most important problem. So the question becomes, does spontaneous order advance the legitimate legal and or moral value more effectively than does constructed order? Remember, the question here is what is the optimum role of the community in commerce and in net neutrality and in telecommunications? So the question becomes here, is spontaneous order, if we're looking at legal and moral value, is spontaneous order a better way to get there than constructed order? And the question, of course, becomes then, how does one measure legal and moral value? And whose value system does the community use to measure legal and moral value? And just some examples I threw out here of minimum wage, child labor laws, gay rights, or anti-discrimination laws might be good examples of this. Should it be up to the parties alone, or are there moral standards that transcend individuals? In other words, take gay rights. Is there some moral standard that goes above and beyond gay rights? Or is gay rights equal with any other rights, and that it's up to the individual transactors to come up with a spontaneous order? In Law, Legislation, and Liberty, Hayek tries, but I think fails, to provide good reasons on how spontaneous order can reduce injustice and create a greater moral order in the long run. He suggests that the courts will, through piecemeal tinkering, incrementally reduce injustice. In fact, when you talk to libertarians, when you talk to free marketers, and they talk about, the role of constructed order, and they're most likely to say, well, the courts should take care of that. The community shouldn't establish laws, that we have courts and we have rules that could apply to that. Well, then here is what Hayek and those would say. My question, of course, is that there's little observational support that conclusion actually works. Injustice, particularly economic injustice, seems to be increasing, not decreasing. That we see an economic inequality, we see many economic injustices being done. Perhaps even the buying of our political offices through Citizens United or something to that effect. Hayek did use the term, and I love this term, rules of just order. And he has another term, rules of just conduct, which I'll talk about in a second, which is purpose-independent, neutral, universally applicable rules, evolved through customary common law processes, which almost all the rules designed to exploit or oppress others originated in legislation. Hayek and free marketers in general believe the courts, through litigation, would be the arbitrator of moral value. Hayek believed that the outcome of spontaneous order that would have lower moral values, such as those that privilege the interest of some groups over others or otherwise work harsh or unfair results, would result in increased litigation, and child labor laws may be a good example of that. This increased litigation would force different rules that may be more productive of peaceful interaction. Hayek felt that these rules that resulted in better cooperative human interaction, he called these rules of just conduct, and again, go and Google this because this is great, the rules of just order and rules of just conduct, would reduce interpersonal conflict. As a result, there is less litigation, the rules are less frequently challenged, and hence they tend to survive and become a stable part of the order. But reality is not demonstrated, at least to me, that reduced interpersonal conflict is the result of a free market. Rather, as rules of engagement become unique to the individuals involved, interpersonal conflict has increased. My thinking is that while Hayek's attempt to explain spontaneous order of the market is largely successful, and indeed contains some of the most brilliant insights into the nature of economic processes since Adam Smith, that's my opinion, and you may or may not agree, his attempt to account for the legal order in similar terms is less successful. This is largely because economics and the law are two different things. Spontaneous order works for commercial transactions because value is more context sensitive in a commercial transaction. Spontaneous order will not work for a legal transaction because legal foundations are based on precedent and history. And this is this fundamental, in my mind, conflict for conservatives, and I'd be interested in anybody out there who disagrees with me on this, that it's not a conflict, but to me it's a fundamental conflict in that sense that spontaneous order works for commercial because every transaction is context specific to that individual. But conservatives believe in natural law, they believe in the Bible, they believe in the Ten Commandments, they believe that there is some foundational legal thinking here that transcends any commercial transaction. So how can you have spontaneous order for economics, but then not have it for legal? How are we to tell whether an inconsistency in the rules is real or merely apparent, or whether it ought to be eliminated or retained? Some in the 1950s and 60s viewed segregation inconsistent and senseless. I was just watching a show the other night on Frank Sinatra and his work toward getting integration in the music industry. He was very good friends with Sammy Davis Jr., worked with a lot of black musicians, and was uncomfortable with the idea that they had to sleep in other restaurants, other hotels. They couldn't go through the same front door that he did. And so he was very concerned about that. However, others who held fast to social convention viewed segregation as an important tradition to maintain. And today, we can see the same thing with gay marriage. Is gay marriage an important, preventing gay marriage, an important social tradition to maintain, or do we now view it as inconsistent and senseless? Only the more flexible view of moral value, derived not from mere experience, but from a broader worldview, could lead to reform of long-standing traditional injustices. As I said earlier, I believe layered on top of spontaneous order is a meta-order that helps define moral and legal foundations. And by the way, this meta-order is something that I discovered in putting these classes together. This meta-communication and meta-order, I think applies very well to these concepts. I think it is the nature of spontaneous order to be riddled with injustice, and it is hard to defend a spontaneous legal order on the grounds that it will deliver an acceptably just society. But if you accept a cultural overlay, a meta-order, so to speak, that helps guide individual choices along more generally agreed moral pathways, then we can see how a spontaneous order can possibly work. In essence, this is what the invisible hand of Adam Smith is. Invisible hand of Adam Smith is a meta-order that's laid on top of these the spontaneous order commercial transactions. And with a meta-order, then you can get a just, equitable society. Well, this is my end of my discussions on spontaneous order. I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk a little about moral hazard and self-reliance, because as we talk about net neutrality, the idea is, who are we trying to protect? Hope you like these lectures. Thanks.